Hey guys, welcome back to my review of the HBO miniseries Watchmen. Today I'll be discussing episode 4 entitled If You Don't Like My Story, Write Your Own. And as usual, of course, I will not be talking about this amazing miniseries by my lonesome. I would like to welcome back Matt Crandall to the stream. Hey Matt, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
In this episode, in true Watchmen fashion, we start off by being introduced to a young couple who meet by an awkward chance. Basically, they meet by a coincidence. One of them is selling eggs, and she sells eggs at the side of the road. She drops an egg carton, and the man who is going to become her husband picks it up. So after that, we see various shots of them living together, brushing their teeth, eating dinner. One night, when they're about to go to bed, a strange woman knocks at their door. And that strange woman happens to be Lady Trieu. Now, Lady Trieu is someone that we haven't seen in the show so far, but we've heard about Lady Trieu because Lady Trieu is the one that makes the phone booths to talk to Dr. Manhattan. So Lady Trieu comes into their apartment, and we discover that Lady Trieu is a quadrillionaire. And Lady Trieu offers the couple a very interesting proposition to buy the house that they're living in and the land that the house is on. And let's just say the scene is very, very awkward and very, very, very strange. So, what did you think about the opening to this episode?
Thought it was kind of wild because, as you say, we start with a couple that we've never seen before, and we're kind of following them as we've got some music playing, and it's like classic montage of these people having their life, and then we cut to a dark and stormy night where a stranger shows up at the door, and when they open it, and Lady Trieu comes in and basically says, "Hi, I know who you guys are. I know that you've wanted a kid and you haven't been able to have a kid. So I got a proposition for you. I'm going to give you $5 million and a baby if you will fuck off right now." And they're like, huh? And so I thought it was so weird, but interesting because I'm like, okay, who is this mysterious character played by Hong Chow as she steps in and is like, you have a ticking clock immediately. If you don't decide in the next 3 minutes, the deal is off and this is worthless. And the couple is a little bit apprehensive, like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. We don't want to move. And she's like, I'll give you the money and a baby. By the way, I already made the baby. I already made the baby out of your DNA. He's here. Bring him in. And they bring in the baby, and it's like, what? What is happening? But it shows us that this is two things. This is a person who is very powerful, very rich, and has access to wild technology that we can't wrap our heads around. But also, this is the world we're living in where weird stuff can happen at the drop of a hat, which is the world of this Watchmen series. So I thought it was interesting that they do the deal in with 4 seconds to spare. And there is a moment where jokingly she's like, if you don't take the deal, we just kill the baby. We just throw him in the trash. So I thought that was wild, and the way that the whole scene plays out is so awkward, but it's intriguing the whole time. And then they step outside as she's ushering them off the property that she now owns, and we see something crash to earth, and everybody's like, huh? And she's like, don't worry about it. I called dibs. That's why I bought your place. That's mine. So get out, enjoy your baby. So I thought it was really well done with the use of music and mystery and the ticking clock, and just showing us that if you go on this Watchmen ride, there are going to be moments where a show opens with people you've never seen before and do something completely wild.
I really, really have a sense that Watchmen sort of intentionally wants to really put its audience in in a mysterious, strange place because they've done this multiple times already in this series. So I'm also I'm thinking that I'm thinking that they don't want to do this to frustrate us. They want to do this to sort of intrigue us, and they do this to introduce characters in a very, very interesting and unique way. But I do have a feeling that all this stuff is going to tie in eventually.
And by the end of this episode, it does become clear that a lot of these threads are starting to be intertwined together that seemed separate by certain storylines that we weren't sure were connected start to be interwoven by the end of this episode entirely.
The next scene that we see is Angela walking back into the bakery. And Angela, presumably, this is just after Angela sees her sibling disappear in her own car. Angela goes back into her bakery and she breaks down William's wheelchair, and she picks up the note that he has, the famous note, the "Watch Out with His Boy" note. She tries to burn it on her furnace, and then she gets a call from the cultural center, and the cultural center mentions that she has some other people in her family tree that she might want to look at. So Angela goes to the cultural center in her superhero getup. Before she breaks into the cultural center, I thought this was very, very cool. She calls dispatch to tell dispatch there's a break-in at the cultural center. If the alarm goes off, it's just me checking the property, which I thought is very, very smart, because essentially she's a police officer and she could break into wherever the hell she wants to. But the way that she covers her bases in this episode, I found very, very intriguing. Anyway, when she goes into the cultural center, she goes up to one of the kiosks. She says who she is, and she gets a nut, and the AI and the cultural center says, "Go plant your nut." And she goes to the back of she goes to another room in the cultural center, and I thought this was very, very cool. They have like these giant platforms where you would stick plants, but instead she takes the acorn, she puts the acorn on the giant platform where a plant would go, and then all of a sudden, through some visual trickery, her family tree comes out in like a hologram sort of thing, showing her family lineage. And we discover that her family lineage goes back to the couple that we saw in the very, very first scene of Watchmen, in the attack on Black Wall Street in 1921. So I'm like, that is very cool. So what do you think about that scene?
So the way all this plays out is well done, and it's done in an interesting way because this is all information that we knew. We knew it, but Angela didn't know it. So Angela has to start connecting dots that we as an audience actually already know. So the reason that they do this is so that Angela can discover it. And the reason I think they do the acorn and the thing is so that we're intrigued as we learn this information that we have already known. Because we knew when they said, Will is your grandfather. Well, we already knew Will was the boy in the Black Wall Street Tulsa massacre. We already knew that from watching the episode. But this is her finding out that not only is she related to him, but his whole family was wiped out in this event. And that they say, you know, this is Will. Him and his family were disappeared, gone. And she says, you ain't gone. 100 years later, you're going to come back and blow up my fucking life. And so we can see that she's pissed that, you know, this guy killed her best friend. Now she's got to cover the tracks because he has mysteriously disappeared again. So she's not sure what to do. So when she takes apart that wheelchair and burns the note, it's because she can't be implicated in the whole Judd situation, but she's getting more context to who this Will guy is and why he may have come back after 100 years, why this is happening. And I thought that they presented it in a way that feels real, because if you go to like a science center or a museum, there's often like things where like, oh, you get a card in one exhibit and you take it to another and you do something else and you can connect all these dots through the exhibit. So that felt like a very real lived in kind of thing that this world would have, as this exhibit where you can learn about history and your own past at the same time. So I thought that was very good. And then as she steps out, we catch up to the end of last episode. So we have gone back, and it's literally the moment where the car comes crashing down, and Angela's like, shit, that's my car. So I thought that was that was really interesting, that now we know where we are at the end of last episode, because timeline wise, it was still unclear exactly where that was in the sequence of events. But now we know it was basically one sort of thing where Will was in Angela's car, it got magneted up into the sky, and then it gets dropped. Will is gone, but Angela kind of has to explain to Jean Smart how this happened and why her car came crashing out of the sky. And Jean Smart, of course, thought it was Dr. Manhattan who dropped it here, and we're still trying to connect, like, what is going on with this? Where did Will go again?
What do you think of the way that Damon and the other writer of this episode is sort of stitching together the stories and putting together scenes from other episodes that we have seen previously?
Well, that just goes to show, again, that they really probably plotted out this entire miniseries very meticulously to know that, like, we're going to show you part of scene 87A in episode 3, but the rest of 87B is not until episode 4. So they've crafted it out, and obviously anybody who knows that we can jump around in time, flash forward, flash back, have things sync up, it's going to be a guy who worked on fucking Lost. So
the first time I saw this miniseries when it first aired, I was very, very, very happy to go down the path that Damon and the other writers sort of played out for me. But I was very, very worried about whether or not he was going to be able to land the ship, because as much as I like Lost, Lost comes like if you say you love Lost, that comes with a price. In fan circles, and I was very, very afraid that it was going to fall apart. But I'm happy to tell you that, spoiler, it didn't fall apart. If you could just speak to a little bit of what is happening with our good old friend Adrian Veidt.
Yeah, it's nightmare fuel. The Adrian Veidt storyline that we cut to a few different times. So I think it's easier if we just talk about it as a chunk, because spreading it out is sort of weird. But yeah, we see him out on a lake, and you're like, what is this guy, fishing? But no, he's harvesting fetuses, and they are these disgusting creatures that he's like checking some, and he's throwing some back, and you're like, what in the hell? And then he brings 2 of them to a machine, and he puts these disgusting babies in a machine, shuts the door, turns the oven on, goes and enjoys a piece of cake while the most terrifying and obnoxious screams happen. And then, the Easy Bake Oven dings, and he goes and he opens the door, and there are 2 clones that are standing there. And it's like, okay, Phillips and Crookshanks have just been cooked up, and they're nude, as they often are, and he gets them dressed, and he brings them to a room where there's a ton of dead versions of them, and he says, hey, can you guys clean this shit up? I got stuff to do. And then we go all the way to, he starts launching their dead bodies with a catapult and watching what happens as they disappear into the clouds, testing some sort of theory of a perimeter. So all of this is wild. This is like the most disturbing and weird part of the episode that makes us wonder, what the fuck? How the fuck? And this catapult thing makes us feel like, again, we have sort of realized that Veidt is probably not on Earth, and it's some sort of prison that he's in. And this is like him testing the boundaries of the perimeter of the prison of some kind.
He does mention while Mr. Phillips and while Mrs. Crookshanks are launching bodies into the atmosphere, he does mention that he was sort of exiled to this place. And at first he thought it was a paradise, but as he spent more time there, he realized what it really was, a fancy prison. And I'm like, wait a minute. Where the hell could he be? And who in the hell could have designed this prison for him? The thing that's very interesting to me is who has the wherewithal to do this to Adrian, and why would they do this to Adrian? So the only person that I can think of that is able to do something like this and put a man of Adrian Veidt's power and narcissism in a pretty prison is Dr. Manhattan. But for all we know, what we've been told so far is Dr. Manhattan is on Mars. So if he's on Mars, who in the world would have done this? So this sequence or collection of sequences, as Matt pointed out, is very interesting to me, very disturbing, but it gave me more interesting intrigue questions that I can't wait to have answered as we go along here in the series. The next thing that we see is when Angela is being questioned by Laurie in her car after she discovers it, she notices that there are some pills in her glove box that belong to Will. So she goes to LG's property, and LG well, he doesn't live, but he has like this giant bunker, and in the bunker he has photos, like blown up black and white photos of the little squid that fell from the sky in the first episode. And we understand that LG tracks these things, and he tries to figure out where they come from, how long they live, and this and that. So we discover that LG is sort of obsessed with figuring out where these squids come from, and we also discover that LG is divorced, and his ex-wife is a scientist of some sort. So Angela gives LG the pills, and she says, "I need you to take these to your wife so she can test them at a lab that's not our lab at the precinct." And the other thing that Angela does is she says to LG, "Look, I found this in Jed's closet." And she shows LG what was in Jed's closet. And LG mentions, "Oh, I guess you're giving this to me because you don't want the FBI woman to know that this was in Jed's closet, and you don't want the FBI woman to find the pills that belong to Will either." So I'm very, very happy that Angela's starting to at least trust someone, and I'm very, very happy that it's LG, because I thought if anybody in this world can be trusted, at least on the police side, it's LG. So what do you think about those scenes?
Yeah, that's what we're assuming, is that LG is on the level and that we can trust him. And it's interesting seeing kind of his like research lab doomsday bunker kind of deal, and learning that, even though these squids dropping from the sky is kind of commonplace in this world, they still don't know what's going on here, and somebody's looking into it. I do like their conversation where Angela says, "Look, yeah, hold on to these pills, get them tested. I got to find out what this is, because they've shown up." And she's wondering, is this something involving the way that a 100-year-old dude in a wheelchair could hang my best buddy? But also she says, "Look, did you know that Judd was racist?" And he said, "He's a white man who lived in Oklahoma. Of course I knew he was racist." And then she goes, no, and pulls out the thing and says, "I found this." And he goes, "Oh, so are you thinking he was 7K? And so I thought that it was interesting that, it's not a complete shock to Looking Glass, but then when he realizes the extent, possibly, it starts to set things off. But it does establish that Angela trusts him implicitly, because she has basically put her own fate kind of into his hands by handing over these pills and trying to keep this information away from Laurie, who has been instituted as kind of the new head honcho at work. So she has stepped in as the hot shit who's investigating. And she even says to Angela, the fingerprints we found in your car belong to this dude, Will, who's 100 years old. Like, what's up with this? So we know that Laurie is on the trail and these pills have something mysterious going on. So I thought the way that all of these scenes work together to again just show that Angela and Looking Glass are very tight, and that even though like we still don't know really what Laurie's allegiances are in the long run. And we do find out more explicitly about her history when her and Angela are in a car together and they explain who her parents are and that, you know, the comedian raped her mom and all that stuff. And so that's the stuff that has been heavily implied. But again, we're just kind of saying out loud, if you were sleeping during some episodes, this stuff really brings it up to speed. So you can figure out those connections. And I thought that was really interesting.
What did you think of the scene when Angela, Laurie, and Petey end up going to Lady Trieu's building because Laurie discovers that the only thing that can pick up a car is basically this thing the Lady Trieu has. So she wants Lady Trieu to give her a document of all the people that can operate this thing to try and figure out who could possibly want to steal Angela's car and put it back in the same place where they left it. So I thought that that was very interesting because Lady Trieu seems to be this sort of like Steve Jobs figure or Elon Musk figure because she's very, very mysterious, very, very weird, and she has a lot of money. So, what did you think of the scene when Angela and Laurie go to see Lady Trieu, and it turns out that she's like in this arboretum where she has it at where she has it at a specific temperature, and she mentions that the one thing that my mom made me promise before she died was I never leave Vietnam, and I compromised, so I brought Vietnam to me. So that's why this room is at a specific temperature. She's very much like a Bond villain.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And as you said earlier, you were wondering who put Veidt where he is the only person who could have done that Dr. Manhattan. Well, at the end of this scene, we start to wonder, is Lady Trieu involved in some way? Because we find out she bought Veidt's company. And she's got a statue of the guy in this arboretum thing. And so we're starting to wonder, and as this goes on, we know that she has these flying machines that could have lifted up the car, could have taken Will away, and we're wondering why she would want to do that. You mentioned the Vietnam thing. We know that Angela is from Vietnam. And while they are there, and, Laurie's kind of like, nice place. The fuck is this sideshow bullshit? Why do you have a statue of Veidt? Why is he old in the statue? Like, this looks like a statue of him now, not like a statue of him in his glory days. What the fuck? And so Lady Trieu's like, oh, we honor our elders. But then her and Angela have a conversation in Vietnamese. And she says, your grandfather wants to know if you got the pills. And she's like, tell that fucker he can talk to me himself if he wants to. So then we do learn Lady Trieu is involved in Will getting taken in the middle of the night in some sort of mysterious way. And her grandfather left those pills on purpose so that Angela would find them. So it raises so many more questions that we're just like, your head's kind of spinning. You're like, all right, what is going on here? How does Lady Trieu fit into all of this? And those questions get raised again as we see Lady Trieu's daughter have a nightmare and come out, and she's disturbed. And then we see that Will is there. Will is with Lady Trieu in this place after Angela and Laurie have left. So again, more questions than answers, but these questions are very intriguing.
There's one more scene that I would like to talk about before we wrap up our discussion on this episode. It's a really, really short scene when Angela comes home and Cal is reading a book. And the book that he's reading is basically a book about how everything ends eventually. And Angela is pissed off because earlier on in the episode, we find out that Laurie took it upon herself to go to Angela's house and speak to Cal. So Angela wants to pick a fight. And Cal says, oh, Laurie came over here and I basically told her everything. Which, of like, when I first saw this episode, I'm like, wait a minute. And I'm like, oh, good. And I'm like, oh, good. He's lying. He's joking. But when Angela sits down, she says something very, very, very interesting. She says, did you tell her about your accident? And I'm like, accident? The hell? why would she say that? So that whole exchange really worked into minds. If I'm thinking about it, it worked because Angela needed to have this conversation with Cal because she was pissed at him. But largely, largely I thought it was constructed just so Angela could say, "What about your accident?" There's this mysterious thing about Cal that we don't know. This accident that Angela brings up, because I don't think that Damon or the writers would bring that up just willy nilly. So I think this whole scene was designed to get that one line.
They're laying tracks so that stuff makes sense, that when you rewatch it, you'll go like, ah, okay. And so it gives us information that Laurie has been snooping around. Cal tells us what the truth would have been, but then he says, no, I didn't say any of that. Like, I covered for you. I lied. And, I hate lying. He's a guy who doesn't believe in lying. And then, yeah, did you tell her about your accident, which seems like some sort of very pivotal event that we don't know what it was or why it's so important, and why, if he had an accident, would it matter if Laurie found out about it? So I think that they do it in a very interesting way, that like, we're like, oh, okay, he was in an accident. I wonder what that's about. So that later stuff that gets exposed lines up better.
This episode was very interesting because of the Adrian Weiss stuff. And it was very interesting because we finally got to meet Lady Trieu, and I really want to see how she fits into the story. But I think this episode is just great because of the way that it starts with the whole with the whole main this couple that we never met before, and everything that Lady Trieu says. Her introduction of as a character is so weird and so out of the box crazy, but it's the performance by the actress is so well done and her character is so well written that I just can't wait to see where we go in the story in future episodes. Because at the very end of this episode, William is with Lady Trieu and he says, and apparently something big is going to happen in 3 days. And the episode ends with William going tick tock, tick tock, tick tock in a very Watchmen fashion. So everything about this episode, where the other episodes were kind of frustrating to me, everything about this episode really worked. So did you feel that, or were you kind of like this episode is like okay, but it's not great?
No, I really do like this episode, and as you mentioned, Lady Trieu and William have an important conversation where she says, why don't you just tell Angela what's going on? Why don't you just sit her down and explain it? And he says, no, she needs to find out for herself the way that she finds things out, which is by investigating, by being this cop. Like, that's the way to bring this information to her. Any other way is not going to be genuine, and it's not going to hit the same way. And yes, there's some big event that's going to happen in 3 days, and the TikTok. And so I thought that's a very intriguing way to end it. But as you said, the strongest part of this episode is the intrigue built in that first 10 minutes. And I just want to shout out something we didn't talk about that's actually my favorite scene, maybe of this entire show, for just how fucking wild it was at the time. And it's still one of my favorite GIFs on the internet. The meme is when Angela is trying to dispose of the wheelchair. All right. All of a sudden, this dude in a silver leotard suit is spotted watching her. And she's like, motherfucker. And she starts chasing him. And she's chasing him, and he's just gunning at full speed. And as she's chasing him, he pulls out 2 bottles of something and starts dousing himself in it. And then he does this amazing slide straight into the sewer out of a fucking Looney Tunes cartoon. And we later learn that this guy is a mass vigilante that we are calling Lube Man. And just the movement of running, lubing himself up, and fucking bobsled sliding down into the sewer is one of the funniest visuals I've seen in any show. And like, the first time I saw it, I just died laughing. It was so fucking funny. So it's like a throwaway scene in the context of this episode, but it's just showing that like we can still have fun in this really weird, messed up world. Lube Man is here to put a smile on our face.
Watchmen, this interpretation of Watchmen is very serious, but I do think that there is this undercurrent of humor with some of the things that Angela says, a lot of what Laurie does, and I think it's going to continue. Even with Adrian Veidt, the way that he goes about certain things, what he says, how he acts when he fails. So I do think that for a large part, this is a very, very serious story about a woman trying to find herself and trying to find out her place in the world. But I do think that, like you said, there is room in there for comedy every now and then. But with that note, guys, I think that'll do it for this discussion of Watchmen. Listen, in the comments below, if you've watched this episode, tell us what you liked about it and tell us what you didn't like about it. But before we go, Matt, if the good folks at home want to catch up with you and chat with you about anything, what will be the best place for them to do that on?
The best place to do it is on Twitter at Matt Crandall. And if you're watching this show and enjoy the writing and you want to get into some heavy Damon Lindelof stuff, on our podcast, Radio 815, we went through all of Lost and other bad robot properties like Felicity, Alias, and Fringe. So if you want to check that out, anywhere podcasts are found or on YouTube at Radio 815.
All right, guys. And if you want to catch me and find out what I'm up to, the best place to find me is also on Twitter. I'm at Creek Fanatic 88. But I'd just like to thank my friend Matt for joining me for yet another episode. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
And until next time, guys, as I often say, I'll see you when I see you.
So much happened here, and so much is about to.